Welcome to the StreamGeeks podcast. I'm joined by the OG StreamGeeks, Mr. Paul. How you doing today?
Hey, John. Thank you for just letting me chill out on the couch today.
Sit
this
back
is great.
and relax
I'm
today. We're
excited.
just hanging out. As you can see on the screen there, we have a great newsletter. If you're interested in learning more about the greatest in the AV space, not just podcasting, we cover all things PTZ and AV. But I also have another Stream Geek with us here. Tess, how you doing? Joined remotely at home via Zoom. How you doing, Tess?
I'm doing good. It's snowy weather here today, so working from home and ready to kick off this podcast. Thanks for having me, John.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for joining us. So, yeah, it is snowy. There's a big snowstorm out, 4 or 5 inches that we just got, but we made it. We're here in the studio. Not only are Paul and I here in the studio, but we're also joined by Joe and Matt from Custom Podcast Solutions. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing great. John, how you doing?
Great.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And give us a little overview about what Custom Podcast Solutions is.
Custom Podcast Solutions is like sort of the brainchild of Matthew and I. We've been working together for several years now in the podcasting space, and we always had like a ton of ideas pertaining to podcasting, podcast studios, production, and studio design as well, like studio building and stuff like that. And so Custom Podcast Solutions is the latest sort of iteration there, where we're trying to just kind of bring everything together and just solve as many podcaster problems as possible.
Yeah, we kind of think of it like a think tank where we can just dream up crazy ideas and solutions and hopefully go out there, implement them, and help out content creators all around the world.
Wow. So all around the world. You're not just limited to the PA, greater Philadelphia area?
No. And I mean, that's really the beauty of podcasting, right? Is just that, I mean, like it's something where like it just takes one person with a voice or a message and they can reach anybody in the world. So right,
Yeah.
that's kind of the way that we kind of approach the business too.
That's amazing. Well, let's jump right into it. And the first question I want to ask, and for you at home as well, what is the first podcast that you guys ever heard of? When is the first time you even heard of what a podcast is? And what was the first podcast you listened to?
I'll take this one because I probably started a lot longer before Joe. I was working at a talk station in New Jersey 1015 in the newsroom. While I was working there, this was around 2007, 2008, the iPhone was announced.
Wow.
And the first iteration of the podcast store was announced. So prior to that, podcast existed, but you had to be somewhat of a tech genius and had to take files from here, move them over here, transfer to your iPod, whatever. But when that podcast store came out, I looked at it and I said to my boss, these podcasts could be worth something to us. We should try it. And what I basically got was, if it doesn't cost me any money and I don't have to do anything, go for it. So my first podcast was actually one that I launched. I would repackage our morning news, strip out the commercials and whatnot. And we would air that as a podcast every morning. And it was so long ago that there weren't really hosting companies that were very well known at the time. So our engineer was able to give me the XML code, and I had to sit there and actually type and update the code every day with the title, with the date, with the description, things like that. So I was doing that for a few years. And honestly, I don't think I started listening to podcasts myself until about 4 or 5 years later when I was turned on to Wait, Don't Tell Me by my sister, because I was a bit of a news junkie, and
Great
I prefer my news delivered in comedy form than serious format.
Yeah, that's a great podcast. I love that. It's so informative and also it's just hilarious. Paul, I feel like you and your family would love that. It's like a family-friendly show. Like, it's a great time. But what about you, Paul?
I do like podcasts. We had a podcast here at StreamGeeks, and our thought was, hey, we're creating a show. Let's just, I remember what it was. So we've been live streaming for almost 10 years, right, with the StreamGeeks. And we had this idea that what we would do is a post-show podcast. So we knew during the live show that we would be showing things and demonstrating things that wouldn't work in a podcast format because we would be screen sharing something or talking about something that we're seeing that the audience on YouTube could see, and Facebook and all these emerging places. But we knew that the podcast format wouldn't work. So what we would do, and it really did work, and I suggest this, we should even do this, bring this back, John, but we would do a post-show podcast. So we would do this elaborate stream, and maybe we were golfing, maybe we were playing ping pong, we would do instant replay, something that was very visual, and then we'd say, okay, show's over, folks. You can keep watching. We're going to go put the headphones on. we would walk to a podcast studio that we had. It was connected via NDI. So Mike, who's our streaming producer, he would keep the stream going to YouTube and Facebook, but all the guests that we had would walk to another room, do the post-show podcast. We had a camera there so the audience could still watch us, but then we knew we've got to talk through this. We can't be referencing screen sharing and things that don't work in a podcasting format. I really liked it. And we had lots of downloads and the podcast was really good. But it was nice to say, all right, take the pressure of being a presenter away and the pressure of live production and just chill and talk.
It was like the precursor to all those podcasts now for like after TV shows, where you have lots of shows like the post-Bachelor podcast,
Yes.
right? The episode airs and then they immediately jump on a podcast and talk about it. You guys were early inventors of that, it sounds like.
Yeah, spreading the messages on podcasting. Yeah, I loved it. I mean, that's some of the earliest content I ever saw was popping up because of you guys just talking about it. And
People liked it, and I think it gave people a much better personal connection
Yeah.
to like Tess, for example, who would, because I would push Tess, and I'm glad she's here on this podcast, because I would push her to talk about really technical things, and it would be easier for her to respond in the post show where it would be like, wow, like we just did that. Like, let's talk about what we just did,
Right. Yeah. Because it's really, I mean, like the beauty of podcasting, or like at least like where it started, which is obviously in like the realm of audio, right, is that it's really just a conversation, right? So like it can feel like it's giving you like a little bit more space to really kind of like say the thing that you want to say, right? Or really kind of do a deep dive into something. But as soon as you have video, I mean, and like we're seeing, the rise of, video podcasting, and a nice sort of like overlap, like with podcasting and live streaming, I think as well. But but with video, right, it really just kind of like adds like another dimension to it, right? Like, and it probably just kind of like serves like a broader audience as well. I think, like when you have the video, but I think podcasting at its best, maybe like it doesn't necessarily need the video part. But I think like that can also change, right? And of course it depends on your goals, which I'm sure we will get into soon as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Tess, I want to hear from you at home, and then I'll stick to you for the polls and all the fun chat. And yes, let us know at home where you're watching and how you're watching. And Tess, if you could get a poll going about, do you have a podcast? I just want to know if anyone's watching has their own podcast, yes or no, or maybe they want to start one, make that the third option. But Tess, also let me know, like, what do you feel about podcasts? When was the first time that you heard about podcasting, and what was your first podcast?
Well, my first experience with podcasting was actually being on a podcast and not listening to a podcast. So that was really interesting because we started a podcast pretty soon after I started here with StreamGeeks. But I've only ever really committed to listening to one podcast besides our own, and it's Crime Junkies. I love Crime Junkies.
Yeah.
They tell stories about true crime, and it's really interesting. So, and I've only ever listened to it. I don't know if there's a video element, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's a really popular one. My fiance loves the crime junkie podcasting. That's always so popular in that genre of crime and murder. So, Mike, let's go over to some slides. I want to show and tell you guys first a little bit about StreamGeeks. If you're kind of new to the channel here and don't know much about StreamGeeks, well, if you can dream it, you can stream it. That's the classic phrase. I think Paul came up with that years and years ago, right? Like, I love that catchphrase. It's so true, and it's wonderful. It's great. But Tess, if you could tell us a little bit about StreamGeeks. What do you do? How did this start? And what kind of fun stuff do we get up to here at StreamGeeks?
Awesome. Well, first of all, welcome to everybody that's watching today, especially Kai Creations is in the chat saying they're first-time live viewers, so we appreciate you being here. Shout out to you. StreamGeeks is a group of live streaming and video production experts. Our goal is to really build a community around live streaming and video production, to share our experiences, and then also to educate on live streaming. So we build a great community here. So yeah, that's basically what StreamGeeks is all about. Yeah, let us know where you're watching from in the chat, and let us know if you have a podcast. I can see 60% are saying no, actually, they don't have a podcast.
Okay, so 60%
Maybe they're more
no, they don't
live
have a podcast.
streamers.
Yet.
Okay. Yes. Yes, that's right. Yet. We don't have a podcast yet. Thank you, Tess.
That's
I
a
Yeah.
lot,
I
40%
appreciate that.
Yeah. true.
So
Doesn't
yes,
shock me.
like Stream Geeks, we do so much here. There's a lot to go over, and we are bringing our podcast back. This is our second podcast of the year, so we're so happy to be here. And we are going to be live at 2 p.m. on the second Wednesday of every month. So stay tuned and always look out for that notification. And fellas, I have some questions for you, because when you get started with podcasting, you need help, right? You need some sort of step to kind of take you from your idea to the actual full-fledged podcast. So I know you guys talked a little bit about custom podcast solutions, but I had this awesome little slide I made where I could show off the beacon. I wanted to ask you guys specifically about the beacon before we jump into how you start a podcast, the questions you might ask. And tell me a little bit about this podcast beacon. I was lucky enough to get one myself at the Stream Geek Summit, and I use it all the time now. It's very fun. So yeah, tell me about the podcast beacon.
Well, the podcast beacon is a product that we came up with to help podcasters and really anybody who has content or something on the web that they want to share easily. The problem that you have with podcasters is you go to an event, you meet someone, they say, "You have a podcast?" And you go, "Oh, great, what is it?" And now you have this ridiculous dance where the person goes, "Okay, hold on, let me get my podcast out. Is this the right show?" And right, there's this, it's really an annoying step to get somebody to actually subscribe. So the podcast beacon, it's an NFC enabled device. You get to decide what it is pointing to. And instead of having people having to search through, they just tap their phone to the device, kind of like you do with the QR code, and it will take them directly to the location you want them to go to, whether it's your podcast on Apple, Spotify, your YouTube channel, your website. And the way that we're thinking about and expanding it, it could be for anything. You could be going to a networking event and you want everyone to tap your Calendly and make an appointment with you. Or you can want them to sign up for your newsletter. So it's just this little easy way to share what it is that you do with people in person, and make that experience a lot easier and a lot more seamless.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. I use it for my link tree. So it's like one-stop shop for everything. Like you're not going to not be able to find a platform that you can use it on. So yeah, I love it. It's such a great idea for a product. But here, let's take a step back. What are we going to do when we start a podcast? You have a lot of questions. There's tech that you need. There's ideas. Are you going to do it by yourself? Are you going to do it with video? Are you going to do it with audio? There's so many questions. So let's go through 10 questions you might ask yourself before starting a podcast. So question number 1, I'll start with you, Paul. What is my podcast purpose? So are you trying to educate? Are you just trying to entertain people? Is it there to promote something? Or are you just trying to inspire your audience? Paul, what do you think?
Well, I'll say that, the thing that is cool about podcasts and you touched on this a little bit, is that like you get this extra space. And I feel like people who perhaps maybe don't want to be on camera or don't know how to do a multi-camera live production, right, can sit down in front of a microphone and exercise their ability to do interviews, their ability to really frame a question and really. So I think podcasters should get a lot of credit for really thinking deeply about the conversation in a way that sometimes, on a random live stream that you're going to watch on Twitch or whatever, it's like, it's not thought out quite as much, right? And there's editing involved.
Yeah.
So I think if you've really got a story to tell and a conversation or an interview, that this podcasting format is right for you. Whether that be conversational like we're having. I like the panel discussions you're putting together here, John. So podcasting is a unique element. Now, if you're a YouTuber and you need to go out into the world and shoot videos, then that's a different thing, right? And I'm hoping for the Stream Geeks that streaming and making videos is going to be complementary to growing a podcast, which we're just launching now.
Yeah.
So I think they all kind of work together, but the podcast format seems to be one of the best for those developing those like kind of rich conversations.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Paul. And to your point, I do think that like the podcasting, right, or like really when it comes to just kind of audio based content, it's kind of like a great starting point, right, which is kind of what you're talking about as well, because it is relatively simple, right? Compared to like this beautiful studio that we're in, with all this great PTZOptics gear. I'm seeing a lot of cameras around, and Super Joy over there. You have like a lot of great hardware. Like they can really help a lot of video based creators. But I think that podcasting, from the standpoint like of just kind of working within the realm of audio, like I think it can be a great sort of a starting point for people to kind of work out like what it is they're trying to say, right? Or what it is they're trying to share, or, you know, the messaging that they are trying to kind of put out there. So, but yeah, like, I mean, but it really is the first question, you know, like what is it that you want to say, right? Like what is it that you want to kind of bring to the world?
It's to follow up on that. I mean, a lot of times people talk about podcasting as being the specific format, right? It's this hour-long conversation. It's this interview. And it really isn't. Podcasting is the delivery system of content, right? There's all sorts of different types of content out there, and some of it makes sense to be delivered as a podcast and some of it doesn't. But either way, whether you're starting a stream, whether you're starting YouTube, whether you're starting a podcast, that question is the most important thing. Why? Why am I doing this? Most of the stuff is given away for free on YouTube and Apple and Spotify and all these different places. But you are asking people to invest their time, which honestly could be way more valuable than anything else that they have, right? And it's not just I'm competing with other podcasts, you're competing with everything that consumes our time. Reading, television, movies, work, family, exercise. And so the question becomes, why am I going to invest my time, my energy, my effort into creating this content? And why is somebody going to listen? Why are they going to give me their time? And so the thing that we always talk to about, you know, with clients and anybody else in podcasting is, what value are you providing? And value can be informational, right? We are giving information about podcasting. Value can be entertainment, right? Sometimes I just want somebody to make me laugh. That is a value for me. Sometimes it's compassion and you know, community, right? Lots of podcasters are doing things in the realm of mental health and, you know, rare diseases. And, you know, they're not solving these problems, but they're creating a space for other people to have that community, to have somebody else that reminds them that they're not alone. So anybody creating any content, podcast or otherwise, the question is, why am I going to do this? And why is somebody going to listen? And the thing that always drove me crazy was people who would say, I really want to start a podcast, but I don't know what I want to do it about. No, you don't need a podcast. Like, it's great that you can. You don't have to. Don't waste your time or anybody else's. And don't focus on the numbers. Like, if you are not willing to talk about something with only one listener, then you're probably not going to get to 1,000 or 1,000,000 listeners because your passion is in the wrong place.
Yeah, no, I think you made so many valid points. I think you're absolutely correct. And sometimes it's about mixing everything. It's about trying to educate while also entertaining, or also trying to promote your own businesses on the side. Like, it can be a combination of all of those. So I think you're exactly right.
100%.
So let's look into number 2, which is, who is my target audience? So there's a lot of people you might want to reach. You might say, everyone is my target audience, right? Like, I want the biggest audience imaginable. Of course, we all do. But where do we start? Paul? I mean, we are in the AV space. Of course, that's kind of our audience, right?
Yeah, I mean, the tools today are incredible. You know, I was looking at our YouTube, and, you know, we have a little over 50,000 subscribers. And so there's a lot of videos out there. And so YouTube has got this new suggestion feature where they're literally using AI to be like, here are the videos you should make. Here's the titles. Here's the descriptions. They're making images. And I'm like, wow, we should make that video. I mean, literally, clearly, YouTube is digging through all this information and being like, here's 3 videos you should make. I wish we had more time because I would make them. The other thing, as you were speaking, Matt, I was thinking, you know, our podcasts, is there a specific time and place in people's lives where podcasts really fit the bill? Like, for example, I'm thinking I'm stuck in traffic, right? I shouldn't be watching YouTube. But it's
No, you should
probably,
not.
it's probably safe to be listening to a podcast, right? So when you're talking about audience, you know, clearly you got to find your audience, and the tools to, once you start to get some content out there, I feel like AI is getting really good at being like, if you're making this kind of stuff, here's some buzzwords that we know works. That was really interesting to me, to fine tune the audience and what they want. Because there's one thing of saying, here's my audience, but another thing is like the continual cycle of learning from the audience and being like, oh, I thought our audience was into streaming, but there's also a big part of them that also want a podcast. And like, there's this cycle of feedback where you actually learn more from your audience, which we've done so much here, where it's like, oh man, there's people in our audience that know more about streaming than we do.
Yeah.
Especially 10 years ago.
Yeah.
We've learned a lot in 10 years, But like starting out the gate, there would be broadcast engineers who would be like, why are you not doing this, this, and this? And we were like, shit, well, we're not that smart yet. So, you can define your audience, you learn from your audience, you change. But I was also kind of interested to know, is there a specific time and place? Like, it's probably not the shower because there's water flying on you, but do podcasters think about that? Like, oh, a lot of people in their cars are probably going to be listening to this.
I would say lots of people are talking about podcasters have to be in video.
Okay.
And I would not necessarily say they're wrong. I wouldn't say they're absolutely right either. The key to podcasting and its success, and why I think even with the rise of video, podcasting will always play an important role, is because it's the one medium you can consume while doing anything else.
Yeah.
Right. You can't watch YouTube while driving. Right. But you can listen to audio.
Yeah.
You can't watch YouTube while you're walking the dog. That being said, I've tried it. It's not great. But you can listen to audio, right? So lots of people are electing to consume podcasts over video because they could do it while they're working out, while they're doing chores, and I don't think there's a single answer as to where is the best place. It's just, where is your audience? So, right, your question is, who is my target audience? And people say everyone. Well, if your target audience is everyone, your audience is no one, right? So you have to know, going back to your why, who is going to get the most out of this, or who am I going to reach that's going to give me the most out of this? And sometimes that's not even the audience. We've had clients who their audience was the guests, right? I interview a guest,
true.
Right? I get a chance to interview someone like you. And it's like, well, is anybody going to listen to this conversation? Maybe. I mean, you're interesting, so maybe. But for me, I got a chance to sit here, meet you, check out the operation, see all the cool stuff you guys are doing. That has way more value to me than 10 extra listeners sometimes.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because after a year of streaming each year, we used to have to do a lot more guests. We don't do as many guests now.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, it takes time to find guests. But I remember looking back at a year and being like, we met like 40 people and interviewed them and had 40-hour-long conversations, and it made a significant impact. And then we see them at the trade shows and whatnot. And it's like, oh, hey, we actually didn't meet in person. Now we are. You've got this backstory and everything. And that was one of the biggest values I got out of it.
Yeah, it can be an incredible networking tool, even if you have one listener.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And like, just to chime in here on this question, unless we're moving on, are we moving on to the next one? Okay. I mean, like, I would say, like, identifying who your target audience is like right there at the top of the list of things that you should probably think about, like, before you even probably press record, right? Really think about, like, the first question, right? Which is kind of the what, like, behind your messaging, but it's also the who, right? And it's, who is really going to kind of stand, like, to benefit from this, and that can mean a lot of things. Like I run a studio in South Jersey, and like, I work with a lot of brands and businesses there. And so, like, this question of who is your target audience is one that can be a fun one to kind of think about, because when you're working with a business, chances are they know who their target customer is, right? Or their target sort of client is, right? So you can kind of, right, you could look at it through that lens. But to kind of piggyback off of the point that Matthew just brought up about it being a great networking tool, it's also a great business development tool too, when you look at it through the lens of a business. And so, like, the target audience question is a huge one, and it seems counterintuitive, but but just to kind of, like, reiterate, like, what you guys have already said, like, if you're trying to please everyone, then you're probably not going to please anyone. And like I would argue that, like, the more specific you can be with who you're trying to reach, like, I think the better off you'll be.
Yeah,
Amen.
You're absolutely right. So, Mike, let's jump to number 3. So we kind of know our purpose, we know who we're trying to target, but now what about our format? I think it's a huge question that a lot of people don't think of. They just say, hey, I want to start a podcast. They grab their best friend or buddy and just start yapping and talking, and they think that's just a podcast. And it can be. That can certainly be a podcast. So, Paul, I'll start with you. Is there a primary type of podcast that someone should start out with, or is it really just based on the specific content they're trying to deliver? Well,
It's interesting. There's so much different types of content out there. Solo creators do some amazing things. I follow this guy, Ants Canada, and he has like these terrariums of ecosystems, and he tells these amazing stories where we'll be like, inside my terrarium, I have a new creature, and take a look. And then there's like, dun, dun, dun. And I'm like, this guy's a solo creator doing some like Steven Spielberg shit, right? So I'm like, whoa. On a podcast, I'd imagine you want to have someone to talk to, right? So, you know, it's an interview. I mentioned earlier that like we found a way to serve our live stream audience with video and then do a post-show podcast, which really worked for us. So, and I know so many people, I don't know what the numbers are, but so many people do webinars. You know, so many people do live streams. I'd imagine that there's more video meetings and webinars and live streams than there are podcasts happening every day.
Sure.
I could be wrong. But I think the point I'm trying to make is I think there's like a space for all of this. And one of the things that we learned is like, if we're setting up to do a live stream, we might as well turn it into several short video clips, right? We might as well take the audio and turn it into a podcast. So a lot of these things can really benefit you if you programmatically design the format to be, you know, so when John does our live streams, right? He'll have a little agenda. And like we'll know going into it, we'll be like, oh, this piece right here, we want to cut that out. That's gonna be a piece that we can snip and repurpose. And so from a format perspective, you know, it's interesting to see like, what do we want to get out of it? Because you can squeeze a lot of juice out of these live stream webinars, podcasts, short video clips, if you plan it properly.
100%. And, you know, I'm going to sound like a broken record when I say this, but what's your format? Again, what's your purpose? I've seen lots of people who are like, well, I want a podcast so that I can build my brand authority and so I can share how smart and knowledgeable I am. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to interview other people. So you're creating this huge platform. You're going to invest all this time and energy, record for 60 minutes, 2 hours, whatever. And for 90% of the time, you're going to let somebody else talk, right? Like it doesn't fit your goals. Now, there are plenty of ways to use interviews as a way to build your brand authority and showcase that you're driving value to the audience and whatnot. But think about that. If this is about you, and in fact, I had this problem. I was doing a podcast where I wanted to share my knowledge about the space, and I was hosting it and I was interviewing other people. I was like, this doesn't work. So then I had somebody just interview me every episode. So he would ask me the question. So then me going from 10% and chiming in annoyingly over the guest to becoming the 90% made all the difference in the value that I was providing and what I was getting out of it. So any of these formats work. The one thing I would say is try something new, right? We don't need yet another of any kind of podcast. Do something new. That's your best chance to break through the noise and to have an impact, is by doing something new and interesting that gets people talking like, did you see that? That's so cool and new and different. That's probably going to be more impactful than whether it's just you or you and your buddies or you interviewing other people.
Yeah, and I feel like if you once again kind of think about that first question, you know, like what am I doing and why? Like I think that the answers or the answer to this question like will kind of, you know, maybe kind of reveal itself to you, you know what I mean? Like just as you think about it, you know, and like maybe as you do like some experimentation, you know, like maybe you have a perfect you know, co-host or something.
Yeah.
For the show. You know, maybe you don't. Like it may be part of your vision like to find the perfect co-host, but if you can't, then like you may be surprised like at what you can do I mean like with a solo show, right? Or with more of a show that's kind of based in interviews, right? Or a hybrid, right? Like you alluded to earlier, John, you know, it's like, while it's like, it's a good thing, generally speaking, I think, to like present like a familiar product to your listeners. I think that it's more important like that you keep them coming back for more, because it's not the same exact thing over and over again. So I would say to people that like, don't be afraid to you know, change it up. Like Matthew did, right? When it seemed like things weren't kind of working on his show, he changed that up, and it seems like you know, that worked out, you know, much better for him. So
the audience wasn't huge.
But yeah, like my point would be like, I think that like the more you kind of like think about your podcast and the why behind like the reason that you're doing it and the who, as far as who were you speaking to, I think that the format may kind of take care of itself.
Who who was that girl that did the crazy format that made her interviewees feel super awkward? And
Oh, yeah,
she
what's
did
her
Mark
name?
Cuban, and she did a bunch of rappers.
Yeah.
You remember that? Tess might remember.
Bobby
Bobby
Antoff or
Yeah,
Bobby
something.
Antoff. Yeah,
Altoff.
Altoff.
Yeah.
something like that.
She recreated a new format. It was
Yeah,
the classic
exactly.
interview format,
Mm.
but literally made the interviewees feel awkward, and it was like funny to watch because you're
Yeah.
like, oh, it's like cringeworthy.
It's like the Zach Galifianakis of podcasts,
Yes.
like Between Two Ferns.
Yeah,
I love
stuff like
Between
that.
Two
Like
Ferns.
there's room for format changes and innovation in the
Mhm.
podcasting space
Tons.
where you can rethink
Tons.
things and really break through the ice. I'll also say that Matt, you know that whole co-host thing, we did that with Tess, and so one of the reasons why we don't have as many guests is because I have things I want to share, and it's random, right? It'll be like I want to talk about instant replay because we got a new product that does that really well. I've generally got enough ideas, and Tess would play the role of the person who doesn't know a lot about that, and people loved it and ate it up. So I remember throughout the years, people would be like, this is so genius, this back and forth between Tess and I, where Tess would be like, ask the questions that the audience would potentially have. So I hate to say that where maybe it was 80 to 90% me talking, Tess would be the type, like in your experiment, and maybe it was more like 60-40, I'm not sure what it was, but to have someone who's the voice of the audience, who maybe isn't an industry expert, but is in the room asking those questions on the audience's behalf is an interesting format to play with.
Well, and that's good because often when we know too much, it's hard sometimes for us to dumb it down. And so having that person there, having that foil who can ask on behalf of the audience kind of allows you also to realize, oh, right, I have to, they don't know what I'm thinking about. So I have to be very descriptive and very specific and, you know, dumb it down a little bit so that I'm giving good answers and bring your audience with you as opposed to talking at them or over them. You get to talk with them.
And with vMix Social, which is what we use, we actually take live comments from Twitter, from Twitch, from YouTube, from Facebook, and allow Tess, and John does this as well, like to curate the questions from the audience. So while you're being the voice of the questions, they're actually truly authentically coming from the audience sometimes. It's interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Love
And you
that.
can stay tuned to the end where we'll have a Q&A as well. So free place for you to ask questions. Matt, I'll stay with you, Mike, if you could switch to number 4 here. I want to ask you, how often should you release a new episode of the podcast? Should it be as many as possible? Should they maintain a specific schedule? Is that more important than being weekly?
Consistency is definitely the best thing above all, right? If you tell your audience we're going to be here every week, be here every week, especially if you're a business doing this, because if you say to people, we're here every week, and then you're every other week, and then you're every month, and then you're every 3 weeks, and you're inconsistent, like if you can't put out a podcast regularly, how are you going to service me as a business,
Yeah.
you know, correctly? That said, if you want to grow your show, you've got to be at least weekly. And the reason I say that is because listeners are very habitual, right? It's Wednesday. I know this show comes out, and I know when I'm making dinner and doing the dishes, I'm going to be listening to the show. And if that show's not there, unfortunately, I still have to do the dishes and make dinner. So I got to listen to something. And not because I don't like you, but because somebody else filled that spot, I might not come back to you. So if you are purely in it for growth and, you know, looking for numbers, weekly is probably going to be your best bet. You know, definitely start out slower and ramp up. It's way worse to say, we'll be here every day and then be like, just kidding, this is exhausting. We'll do every 2 days. Like, you don't want to disappoint the audience. You always want to say, we're going to give you more.
Sure.
Now, if you're a big brand and you've got a huge marketing engine behind you, you can go every other week. You can go once a month, right? Because you're not relying on that consistency. You're big enough to say, when we put out something, people are going to want to listen. Or we have information that's so specific, we know that when we're going to talk about the stuff, people are coming back to us. But if you're just out there trying to start a podcast and get advertisers and grow your audience, if you can't do weekly, I would say don't be shocked if it's an even bigger struggle than anything else you work on.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything Matthew just said. And like, I think that to the point of like that Paul was alluding to earlier, just as far as like how much like juice there is to squeeze. Like I think you said, you know, like from something like a podcast or a live stream, you know, it kind of depends too on your marketing approach, I think. Right. And again, knowing your audience and knowing where they hang out, because if you can create like a lot of clips from the podcast, right? If you can create a lot of content, if you can keep sending out newsletters during like the interim period where maybe you don't have new episodes, you can still keep those people engaged. And there's also something that a lot of people do, which is to like record more than you actually put out, right? So it's kind of like where you can give people like bonus content, right, and stuff like that, right? Or like parts of the of the recording process that maybe like weren't included in like they weren't included in the published episode or something like that. So, but the point is that it really kind of depends, I think, on who your audience is. Again, like we keep kind of coming back to that, like, and also just like the higher level sort of like approach that you're taking, just in terms of keeping the audience engaged, because I think like that really is kind of the goal, of course, is to keep people coming back. But yeah, to back up what Matthew said, it's probably better to start less frequently, and kind of ramp it up over time, based on what you can handle, and make sure that you can keep it consistent, because that's key.
The StreamGeeks podcast, great reminder, we'll be here at the second Wednesday of every month at 2 p.m. We are consistent every month. We also have a PTZOptics live show, which is 2 p.m. at the end, the last Wednesday of every month. So tune into that as well. Scheduling and figuring out a timeline is really difficult. I started my podcast, which shout out Worthy Podcasts, all available platforms. That's the best picture breakdown from past to present. So I started out doing 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks we would post an episode, and it had so much history involved that it was very difficult. It's to do all that research, to watch every best picture from every year. It took so much time, and we were just burning ourselves out. And we learned quickly that it just wasn't worth the amount of grind. And we pulled back and did it every month, and it became much more, it was something to look forward to every month. We were more excited about producing it. We had more time to do research and kind of dig deep in. So I think it really depends on exactly what you guys said, the kind of content you're kind of making, the kind of audience you're trying to retain and keep. It's a history podcast, so it's like, we can go slow. The history has already happened. If you are really that hungry for it, you can go look it up yourself. Okay, so Mike, let's move to question number 5. And this kind of has to do with your topic, your choice of topic, and what your podcast is about. And I kind of want to frame this because obviously anyone can make any podcast. But I want to start with you, Paul. Can you make a podcast without knowing anything about a certain topic? Can you just go in blind? And is there a way to approach a podcast in that way? Or should you have some sort of knowledge about what you're talking about?
Well, it's interesting. If you're funny enough, right, you can talk about anything. If you're curious enough, right, and you've got someone to interview that can answer your questions. I mean, there's interesting formats, right? I mean, you could interview ChatGPT and get audio coming out of that thing if you have to. The interesting thing, based on what I just heard, is that you got to come up with something that's doable in your current workload in your life. We used to do 2 shows a week. And I was like, oh, that's not that bad. 2 a week. There's 5 days in a week. And I was okay with that for like 3 to 4. I think we did it for like 5 years. And it was a lot of content. But what we weren't getting was we weren't doing the chops. We weren't spending a lot of time on the development. And so now we moved to this like once a month platform, which gives us a lot more time to think about it. And it's a once a month to us. It was like, you'll figure out what that topic's going to be on once a month. Yeah. You're only doing 12, right?
Definitely, yeah.
And then you can really think about, so we do like once a month, but then that becomes like 10 or 15 little gems inside of it that will sprinkle throughout the year. And it's a nice little, and then we're adding some other videos on the side. So burnout is a really big deal. So if you're curious, and you can talk about anything, right? And you're funny and you could find that niche. I think I would rather you take that energy and that passion that you have. Like here's something interesting that I learned recently. Like willpower, is a renewable resource, right? Like your willpower to get shit done. You wake up in the morning, get shit done, right? But then you're tired. It's renewable in the sense that every single day that you wake up, you're going to have more energy. You're going to have more willpower, but you have a fixed amount of it. Someone is mean to you. somebody, rubs you the wrong way, suddenly your willpower starts to go down, right? So I bring that in the sense as like, if you're a content creator, you need to have that curious energy. You got to figure out a way to get the best out of yourself, right? On a schedule, right? Is it every day? Is it every week? Is it once a month? You have to try to bring out the best you, right? In a reliable way. And I know from my experience, like twice a week was okay when I was 25. Now that I have 3 kids and I'm 37, I'm like, once a month is just enough, So like life changes, things happen. But, and people, you're more ambitious when you're in your 20s, and then suddenly in your 30s, you want to be more strategic, right? So the world changes, but you got to find your best self and figure out how can you, with podcasting, right? It's not going to happen the first time. It's got to be on some type of schedule. And I think the world is, as you said, Matthew, it's like drip fed, right? They want it. Once you create an audience, you got that special thing. So it's more important to find the special thing, however long it takes, and then figure out how frequently can I make this special spark happen? Is it once a week? Is it once a month?
We're going to use a lot of buzzy green energy words here, but John, to your point, can you do it consistent? Can it be sustainable? Right? Can you keep delivering high value every time? It's easy to say I'll put out a podcast every day, but it turns out 3 out of the 5 are absolute crap, right? They don't say anything. They don't provide value. They're useless. So can you do it, and can you do it well to the level that you want to do it, to the level that will represent your brand well? But back to the question about niche. One thing I've learned is that there is no niche too small. There is a guy, he goes by the moniker Glenn the Geek. He's a big time podcaster. He lives out on a horse farm down in Florida. He has a whole network of shows. And it all started with a show called Horses in the Morning. It's basically just like a morning radio talk show, but it is centered around the life of people who live and train and ride and deal with a lot of horses. And I remember sitting down with him a few years ago at a conference, talking to him, asking him some questions. And one of the things he told me that just blew my mind was, this one show gets a few 100,000 listens almost every day. And he said, but one of my most profitable shows, though, was only getting 600 downloads. And he said, it's because it was all about carriage horse racing. Like Horses in the Morning, there's magazines, there's TV shows, there's lots of things being talked about in terms of horses. But when it came to carriage horse racing, there was nothing. There's no ESPN network for, carriage horse racing. There's no magazine. There's maybe a blog post or two. And so it turned out having this super specific niche where he knew exactly who the audience was extremely profitable, because now if you are someone who wants to reach that audience and service that audience, he was the only game in town. And so he could charge a huge premium for 600 downloads versus, the $15, $20 that people are getting for the 100,000 downloads. So I don't think there's any niche too small when it comes to podcasting or any content creation. But, don't just attack a niche because it's available, right? Be curious, be passionate about it, and then you'll find some success.
Yeah, Paul, I think you brought up a great point too about this when you kind of were saying, and I'm going to paraphrase you here, but you basically said, like, it's better to wait to create, like, until you know that it will be great, which I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but
No, it was good.
but you know what I'm saying, right? It's like, it's almost better to wait for like the idea, right? Or the concept, or like the mission, right? Or like, it could even be on like a per episode sort of basis, right? Like maybe you're not sure what you're going to talk about, right? Even if you have your niche, right? You might be struggling to come up with like what you're going to talk about, right? On your next episode. Like, I think that it's one of those things where like it will kind of come to you, and like ideally like it'll be born out of passion. And it'll be something that like you could sit here, right? You could talk about it forever, right? And it'll just be something like that comes very, naturally to you. And I think that like another point that I want to kind of make about the niche too is that, like, I think that word can sort of be like, it can be thought of too when you think about some podcasts like that that are focused around, comedians, right? Where like it's just a comedian talking to people, right? And it's just like a niche, I think, too, can be sort of born out of like a personality, of a certain person,
Yeah.
right? Or a certain dynamic that certain people have, and just the conversations that they have about just about anything. So, I mean, like the niche is really just kind of, I think, like another way to look at what kind of helps you to stand out, right? Like what sets you apart, right? And what makes you unique, right? And like, it's kind of cheesy, like to say, but it's, but it should be something that you're passionate about, right? And I think that like when you find it, like I think you'll kind of know that you found like your thing that you want to talk to people
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, your voice, your tone, the filter through which you experience life can be your niche, right? There's thousands of podcasts about politics, but a lot of them are different because they come from different experiences, different people, right? Different things that they are going through. And so the person who is experiencing life the same way you are is going to address politics in a way that might relate to you better than mainstream media or, some of the more popular podcasts out there about politics. So niche isn't always just about topic. It can also be how you approach, certain things out there.
I want to learn more about carriage horse racing. That sounds like a fun time. That sounds like so dangerous and scary and Roman and
We have the podcast for you, John.
yeah.
That guy's got the market cornered.
All right, Mike, let's move to question number 6, where we're talking about hardware and software. So obviously anyone can start a podcast as long as you basically have a computer that's going to have a microphone and it's going to have a camera. Is that good? No, probably it's the worst way to kind of create a podcast, but you can do it. Basically, I want to ask 2 questions. One, should a podcast always be video, or should it be audio only, or maybe should it be both? And how do we kind of figure that out? And also, what matters more, audio or video, if you're going to do both? I'll start with you, Matt.
Oof.
I
Do
can start.
we have 40 minutes?
Yeah, I know it's going to be a whole show in itself. Yeah.
Here's what I'll say about the audio video discussion. Whatever is easiest for you to get started, go there. There's a lot of people talking about how you have to have video for a podcast these days. And if you can, you absolutely should. The benefits of incorporating video into your podcast are countless, between discoverability, engagement, preference by all the different platforms for video over other types of content. The way it's more engaging when you're posting stuff on social media and things like that. There's no argument that if you can do video, you should. That being said, if you're going to do anything poorly, it's not worth doing. So if you don't want to, if you don't feel like you're going to be comfortable in front of a camera, don't do video. If your guests are not going to be comfortable in front of the camera, don't do video. If your setup is going to look terrible, right, or is going to, make you look like a slob, or right, like is not going to reflect well on you or your brand, especially if we're talking about businesses having podcasts and things like that, don't do video. But if you can, and the tools today make it so easy, then yeah, you absolutely should try to incorporate it when you can. And even if you don't plan on publishing full episode videos of your podcasts, capture video now while you can, because like you've talked about a few times, Paul, the clips from video can be very useful even if you're not putting out the whole episode. There's a million things you could do with video that just audio does not get the same kind of engagement out there in the world that video can. As far as the equipment, I kind of going back to what Joe and I were saying earlier, it's okay to start small, right? I mean, these PTZ cameras that you guys have are gorgeous. They do a million things. But if I'm going to invest $1,000 into my video and I'm only going to get 5 or 6 downloads every time, I'm going to be that much more frustrated by the process because I've laid out all this money. Start small. People who are thinking about a podcast, they're not sure if they want to do it, they're considering it. Before you invest any money, take your phone out, hit the voice recording app or put on the camera, just talk, right? See if you're comfortable doing it. See if when the mic is on, you feel as passionate and interesting about the topic as you feel like you are in your head. And then as you are improving, right, as your show gets bigger, then invest in a better microphone, then invest in the camera, then invest in this, right? Like it is good content. here's the other thing we always talked about. You can invest all the money in the world in an amazing camera, an amazing microphone. And if your content is garbage, it doesn't matter. I've never heard a single person in my life say, my God, that podcast was so boring. But it sounded amazing. So I kept listening to it, right? Like nobody cares.
Yeah.
Now, is there a minimum level if your content is good? If your content is really good and the quality is only so-so, most people, they'll get past it, right? You know, there's some minimum levels, like you should try and have a decent microphone or do, like, there are things that you should be doing. But if your content is good, the rest can follow. If your content is crap, there is no camera or no microphone in the world that is going to improve upon that.
Yeah. I'll agree with that. There are a lot of brands that and sports teams and, you know, companies that are jumping into their first podcast that out the gate have to keep up the brand reputation that they have.
Agreed.
So while there, you know, I agree with you from a grassroots perspective, there's also a ton of businesses who are starting their first podcast and it's the Philadelphia Eagles or whatever, and they've got to come in guns blazing looking amazing. So we're seeing, I mean, it's just such a big market. We're seeing that across.
Well, yeah, but they can afford the $1,000 camera without feeling like it's eating into their food budget.
Yeah.
Especially after, you know, winning a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I just have,
that's right.
yeah, I just have a note too. It's like, it's a simple one, but it's basically that, like, in my opinion, you know, I think that, like, to Matthew's point, you know, the first thing, the most important thing is the content itself, right? But I would say that the quality of your audio matters, I think, more than a lot of people that are starting out might realize. Because, like, if you're listening to something and it sounds like crap, right, and you have and it's just like it's in your car, right, or you're listening through like your headphones or something, and like it doesn't sound good, or it's recorded through like a laptop mic or something, right, and there's not a lot of processing done to it, you know, it's just not it's just not fun to listen to, right? So I think that, you know, it's a really good investment, like, for anybody to, you know, just really think about the quality of your audio, because I think that it all starts with audio. You know, video is huge, but I think that the first thing that a lot of podcasters and content creators need to think about is the quality of their audio. And the good news is you don't need to break the bank to get a really nice mic these days either. You know, they have really nice mics that you can just plug right into your computer with the USB.
Yeah.
We're using really nice Shure SM7Bs here. You know, these things are phenomenal. They're kind of right. It's like the standard in the industry now. But I mean, you can get a great mic for $100, $200 that will last you for years, and it sounds just so much better, and it will really, really like, it'll just really like enhance the product, you know, and like it'll really give your listeners just a much better experience.
Yeah, everything's getting cheaper and cheaper. And that kind of leads me to our next question, Mike. Question number 7. There's a lot of tools out there, a lot of different ways you could edit your episode, but I want to specifically know what you guys think. How should people edit their episodes? There's so many AI tools that people could use. Should people jump right to that and just get their hands into the AI workflow, or should they, you know, get down and dirty and cut the podcast themselves? I can tell from personal experience that I over edited like crazy when I first made my podcast. I was editing so much. Yeah, thank you. Audio quality is key. We love audio quality. It's necessary to even start your podcast. But I found that it was just way too much. I was editing out every single little noise. It was just too much, and I spent way too much time doing it when I shouldn't have, really. So I'll start with you, Paul. Should you jump right to the AI? Should you use these new tools, or should you cut the podcast by hand?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, if the AI tools work, you know, use them. I haven't found any that have been really great, to be honest. And they certainly do make mistakes. I said to a friend of mine who was doing sports highlight reels, and she was like, I need help doing sports highlight reels. I was like, I'll help you, but I'd like for you to learn how, because I think editing a highlight reel is something anyone should be able to do. Like, video editing is a skill that everyone should ever do. And she was actually insulted by that, because she was like, well, I don't know how to video edit, and I don't plan to. And so it's interesting. Like some people literally can't do video editing. It's just, they don't plan to do it. They won't learn it. They don't want to learn it. They're going to hire someone else to do it if they have to do it, right? So like in my mind, as I'm so ingrained in this, I'm like, edit your videos, learn how to cut it up and smooth it out. But it's actually quite challenging for people. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort. So if AI finally makes that easy for people, then it's going to be welcomed. I don't know what your experience is, guys.
Yeah, so like I'm having some thoughts here just about like the podcaster like that's listening, right? Like the person that just wants to kind of think about like the podcast, right? And think about the content and focus on their guest and focus on the conversation. I mean, I would argue that it's worthwhile to spend a few hours on YouTube, find a good channel that you like, learn a little bit about basic video editing, learn a little bit about basic audio editing. I think it's worth your time if you're going to be a content creator that's that's really trying to kind of get serious about it. It's really not too hard of a thing to do. I mean on a basic level, and I think it's worth just kind of working on building that foundational skill set there. Just in case that you want to make a certain clip or something like that, right? Or if you want to get creative, right? It's a really great mode of expression. So like I would say that, like, and I just think that the tools that are out there nowadays are great. They're just super convenient. I mean, I use Premiere for 99% of my video editing these days.
Same here.
And I use Adobe Audition for 99% of my audio editing. But there's programs like CapCut that just make it very, very easy to pull off just small cuts, right? And really just kind of put something together that like they could be passable, depending on what it is that you're looking to do. And I don't know if that's free or not. I think they have a free version. But I mean, it's one of those things that is worth, looking into. Like, I think if you're going to be a content creator, my point on AI, or like my take on AI tools, is they are, there's plenty of them out there. I use some of them, but I think that there's a caveat there. I think that they're super convenient. I think they can be really effective. They can make a lot of your processes much, much easier and much more efficient. I think that the caveat is that I don't think you should rely totally upon them. And the reason why is like for me personally, like when I'm on social media, particularly on LinkedIn, this seems to be a thing. Like I can just so clearly tell when somebody just typed a prompt into ChatGPT and they just copy and pasted it and they made it a LinkedIn post, and it drives me crazy. Like I can just pick up on it so quickly. Like it's become that way too, like with video clips, right? With podcast clips, just with social media content in general. It's just like you can tell when somebody just ran something through something like an Opus clip, which, by the way, is a great platform. But like I think if you just plug your podcast into it and you expect it to spit out clips that are really great, that are going to engage, I just think that it's worth it to spend a little bit more time using the tool, like maybe to pick out the clips, right? Or to be able to identify those clips within your podcast, but to put a little bit more effort into actually producing them and polishing them, I think is worth the time. Because like to an earlier point that Matthew made, I think, which is basically like it's to say, like, if the content's crap, right, then like it doesn't matter, like it doesn't matter like if it's like it doesn't matter like if it's out there, right? I mean, or like if you're doing all the right things, because if it's not good or if it's lazily sort of made, then I think that it could possibly do more harm than good. So I would just say be careful with AI, use it, but I would say don't rely upon it too much.
I want to get back to the original question about why and when to edit, but I saw Lucy M posted, what's a good starter microphone? Audio Technica ATR 2100 or Samsung, not Samsung, Samsung, SAMSON Q2U. Both of them are available on Amazon. Both of them are like $40, $50, $60, depending on when you catch it. They are XLR USB microphones with a built-in headphone jack. I used to keep one of those in my laptop bag all the time. I would just plug it into the computer, plug in my headphones, and I can be podcasting from anywhere. You use them correctly, you will take your quality from like a 2 to a 7 or an 8 for very little money. So definitely worth looking into those. You know, when we started our editing business, it happened because my first client, he was one of those people who really wanted to impress his guests more than the audience. And so he was a stickler. He wanted every like, right, like any crutch word had to be gone. And it was onerous and it was painful, but his content sounded amazing. And his guests were flattered. And like we would always get emails like, I've never sounded this good. You made me sound amazing. Like they're happy to share it. If you can afford that kind of editor, if you can afford that kind of editing style, great, do it. If you're just starting out, it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to sound authentic and real and natural. I'm at the point now with my podcast, I don't worry about the filler words and the ums and the ahs. I just make sure if there's a major mistake, right? Like we need to retake a question, take that out, right? And that doesn't take very long. Or, they said something that they weren't supposed to say, and we need to take that out, right? Like we can fix that. But I don't think you have to be a super over editor of your content in the beginning, especially if you're learning and practicing and you don't have 20 hours to edit a 40-minute podcast. As far as the AI tools, I would not rely on them for editing my content because they are going to be choppy and curt and harsh, and it's going to, like Joe said, it's going to make it clear that this is an AI-driven product, and it's going to lose a lot of authenticity and lose that kind of realistic nature of the content. AI tools are great for improving the sound, right? Maybe you record in a bad spot and you run it through an Adobe Enhance or something like that, and it'll really just make it all sound crisp and clean again. Like that's a great use of AI. Or generating your first round of show notes and then cleaning that up a little bit. AI can help. Humans still have to be the final say in all of this. I think especially these days with all the live video that is out there, the world is just used to us sounding natural, right? Us sounding real. And so for video clients, we were always like, we're not going to edit it as much because people on YouTube are mostly just talking and they sound real and they're not over edited. So I don't think you have to worry too much about that editing in the beginning, but if you want to, great. Just be prepared for it to take time, take energy, or you're gonna have to spend money for someone to do it well.
Yeah, I always say, and that's kind of usually the pattern I always see, is it's about 2 to 3 times the length of the podcast if you're editing by hand. So
if it's a good guest.
Yeah, exactly. And ours sometimes run 3 hours, so that's 6 to 8 hours you're spending just editing one podcast. Ooh. And then you're talking about gathering clips, putting those clips in. Like it could take much longer than that. So think about that before you get started about how long your podcast should be, because that'll drastically change how much you want to be editing as well. All right, question number 8, Mike. So we have a podcast, right? We've recorded it. Doesn't matter if it's good or not. We need to get it out to people. That's all that matters at this point. So I'll start with you, Paul. Is as many platforms as possible the best answer? Should we just blast this to as many people and platforms as possible?
Well, I was asking Matt and Joe about this because we have the same question in our minds. Somehow we became, YouTube is our biggest platform, and so we spend a lot of focus there. And we're like, essentially it's like, how do we spend the least amount of work to get to the most amount of platforms without diluting our presence? And the reason why I say that is because a lot of people, it's our Stream Geeks, say, I'll restream to every platform, but aren't able to actually watch the chat on Twitch, right? Or aren't actually able to respond to the people on Facebook. And then I think at that point, you're streaming to too many destinations because you can't even create an audience there. You can't even respond to them there. Mm-hmm. But I feel like with podcasts, going to as many platforms as possible is the best thing ever because you're not expected to answer comments live, right? So is it really the case of just go to as many places as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is because, the way I look at podcasting, again, when we're thinking about it just in terms of audio podcasts, I guess, is that it's just kind of like radio on demand, you can find your show, you don't have to kind of catch it live, right? It's like, it's there for you, when you need it. So, it makes sense to just kind of cover all the bases you can and make sure you're covering, and like just make sure that you're on all of the platforms, that people, tend to listen, right? Because, that's where they're at. And so, like, it's good to be on Spotify, of course. It's good to be on Apple. It's good to be on Amazon Music. Some of these more, like these podcast platforms, like that some people might not think about. And a lot of podcast hosting platforms, they kind of take care of that for you, right? So, like, the idea with those is that, you sign up, in one place, and they create your RSS feed, and then they sort of take care of disseminating the podcast out to these different platforms for you, and you only have to upload it to one place. So it's really a beautiful thing to use a podcast hosting platform. There's a lot of them out there, a lot of great ones, and it's just, I think it's the way to go for podcasters. I'd also mention YouTube as being a great platform as well for many reasons. And something that people might not, think about a lot is that you can get away with posting audio only content on YouTube.
Really?
You can, in the sense that, like, you could just put you put a still image there, like you put the audio up. I don't know if people are really going to be listening to that very much, but I know that there's YouTube Radio, right?
YouTube Music is now
Music,
designed for just that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's, but it's really just like something that, like, you might as well do that now, because, like, it's just, like, the podcast hosting platforms, they'll cost you a few bucks a month, not a ton. And it's just so worth it for the time that you're going to spend, rather than having to go to the different platforms, and manually upload. It's really a no-brainer. And if you use a podcast host, then it takes care of that for you. The only additional step that you might have to do is you might need to upload it to YouTube, but it's very worth it because it has billions of monthly active users. I think it's the second largest search engine in the world, and there's a lot of people looking for podcasts on YouTube. So that would be my suggestion.
To the question, should I have hosting? My answer is unequivocally yes. Alan just posted a comment. He says, I use Blueberry and it sends out my content to Apple and then it goes to all these other places. That's true. Blueberry is a great platform. I work for a company, Libsyn, one of the oldest podcast hosting companies that have been around. And as someone who had to, like I said earlier, I had to update the XML file by hand. And I'm not a coder. I've never taken coding class or anything like that. Like, sure, I could figure it out and it was fine. But the fact is, if you're not using one of these hosting companies, right, with $5 plans, $20 plans, whatever it is a month, then you are responsible for updating that XML file, which can be somewhat onerous and annoying. And you're also responsible for the hosting and the bandwidth of disseminating that content. And so if you're putting that on your website, right, you have a company website and you're also going to put your podcast up there and you upload an episode that's 50 megabytes. And let's just say for some reason that episode now gets 1 million downloads. That is a massive strain on, one, whatever your bandwidth costs are going to be, right? Probably an unexpected bandwidth cost that you weren't looking for. And so there goes a big bill that month for your data usage. But also all those people pinging your website servers could impact your website's ability to do all the other things that it has to do. So a company like Blueberry or Libsyn or Captivator or whoever, right, they take care of all that for you. They make it easy. They give you a website. Most of them, they will, like Joe said, they will tell you, here are all the platforms that we can easily send your podcast to, right? You go to Apple and that gets you on Apple and 100 other places that look at Apple. Gets you on Spotify and Amazon and Geo7 and Ghana and, at the time, Samsung and all these different places, all these things that most people wouldn't know how to do on their own. And even if they did, they might mess up the steps. These podcast hosting solutions, they are responsible for staying up to date with all the right requisites, right? They all stay up to date with the right measurements and analytics. So if you ever want sponsors, right, you're going to want a platform that's the sponsor's going to know, oh, these are legitimate downloads. Mm. And if there's ever any changes, right, Apple changed their categories a few years ago. If you go to SoundCloud, they're still using the wrong categories. But if you're on one of these hosting platforms, they said to you, hey, we talk to Apple all the time. We've updated the categories for you. Your podcast remains compliant with what's happening. So again, for $20 a month for, from a Libsyn or something like that, make it easy, get a good content management system, get great analytics, and don't worry about it.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. I learned a lot about that as well. I've been posting for like 4 years, and you taught me some things I never even knew. So that's really helpful. Okay, Mike, question number 9. So we have the podcast, it's been published, it's been uploaded. Now, how do we promote it? Well, I can tell you from experience here, we send out a big email. It's maybe why some of you guys are here watching now. We also publish on socials. We have a whole series of socials that we publish on. But Paul, is there something I'm missing? Is there some secret, way of marketing podcasts that I'm not aware of?
It's interesting. The very first book I ever self-published was called Live Streaming is Smart Marketing. And I think podcasting is essentially smart marketing for whatever you're doing, your personal brand, your business, etc. I had this whole checklist of things. Like we would like do a press release, which sounds crazy, right? Like you can do a press release for every podcast. But, maybe it's worth it. There's a lot of ways to promote your podcast. I'm interested to know, you guys are the podcast experts. Is there paid advertising for this type of stuff? You'd imagine there is.
Yes. So one, all the things you have mentioned, right? All the digital marketing platforms, your email newsletter, your social platforms, press releases, those all have to be part of your strategy. I would say in most cases, that's going to be more of a brand building, brand recognition strategy than an actual growth strategy, unless you are doing it really, really well and have, lots of resources to put behind it to, get that, that number that you need to get for people to subscribe. What I have sort of found is that one of the best ways to promote a podcast is through other podcasts. Why? Because not everybody listens to a podcast. So if I'm Oprah Winfrey putting out a podcast and I say, I'm going to put an ad in Oprah magazine. Hey, check out our podcast. Well, how many of those magazine readers listen to podcasts? I don't know. Maybe 20%, maybe 30%. Number's probably getting a little bit better. But if I'm going to promote my podcast on The Daily from the New York Times, well, at least I know everybody hearing that ad knows how to consume a podcast, right? So at the very start, at least I'm hitting the right type of audience. So that's true if you want to buy ads on other shows for your podcast, if you want to buy ads on the podcasting platforms like Overcast or Spotify, or a few others have like banner ads that you can do. That's also true if you want to go out and be a guest on other podcasts or have people come onto your show who are also podcasters, because they're going to tell their audience, who again, most likely listen to podcasts, I have another show for you to check out. So just eliminate the burden of figuring out who is going to be able to listen to my content by talking to people who consume this kind of content. That said, I have always found that the shows that do really, really well in podcasting, or honestly any kind of content creation, it doesn't matter, all the marketing hacks in the world, all the marketing gurus in the world, they'll all sell you, these amazing ideas and these guarantees. And the truth is, the best way to grow your podcast is to have your listeners be your advocates. I can tell you, for every show that I've ever subscribed to, that I've ever listened to on my own, I got it because somebody who I know, like, or trust, right? Whether it's a family member, a friend, an influencer in my industry, someone whose newsletter I read, somebody on TV who I like to follow. If those people are endorsing a podcast, I'm way more likely to go check it out than some random Instagram ad. Also, if I'm on Instagram, I want to be on Instagram. I'm not going to Instagram to then stop, switch over, put on a podcast, right? I'm usually looking at Instagram or something like that, like on the couch while watching TV. I'm not going to start playing audio while everybody else is out there, or I'm in the bathroom, right? I'm not going to be that weirdo who starts listening to a podcast in a public bathroom, right? Like I'm on this platform to do this. I'm not necessarily coming here to find somewhere else to go. So truthfully, podcasting is all about talking to the audience, but really good podcasters, we said this kind of early on, they listen to their audience. And if you can have a good conversation with your audience and you can turn them into fans and advocates, they will help you grow your show way faster than, a few likes on Facebook or a few retweets on X or something like that. Is it still called a retweet or is it a re-X now?
Yeah, I hope not. God.
Who knows?
That's a weird term.
So that's like some masterful knowledge there from Matthew. and it's very true. Word of mouth. You really can't beat it. So that's probably the best like way to go if you can. But if you are looking at finding ways to kind of promote in a more traditional sense, I guess we would say, I would throw out there
Podcast beacons.
and like I would say tap into your existing audience first of all, right? So if you have a social media following, if you have a mailing list, right, if you have a book of business even or something like that, I don't know, right? I mean, whatever like you
Friends
already
and family.
have, right, as far as some kind of audience, start there. Like there's fun ways to kind of incorporate the podcast or the content from the podcast into your newsletter to kind of entice people to maybe go check it out. Because to Matthew's point, if somebody's reading a newsletter or if somebody's on social media, chances are, they don't want to stop what they're doing to go check out your podcast. But I think that like there's ways to just, use social media, which people are already on. Use your newsletter, which people are reading already, and use networking events, right? Or like just a conversation like you're having with somebody, to just kind of let them know you have a podcast, right? I think like planting those seeds, can be a good thing, and then of course, creating clips from the podcast, which is something we see a ton of, and I think for good reason, because it's a little teaser. It's a little like bite-sized portion of the podcast, and it kind of gives people a chance to consume a small piece of it. A small like curated piece of it, like that was handpicked, so that they can get like a little bit of a taste, right, and see what it's all about without having to leave the social media platform, without having to leave the web page or the newsletter that they're in, because it can be directly embedded into it. So, like those can be done, and they should be done, I think, for just about every podcast, that's looking to grow. But I really do think that, word of mouth really is, it's the most tried and true and, timeless method of advertising out there. And like, I always think that it's good, to keep it organic. And I think that a lot of podcasters can do that when they're first starting out.
I'm just throwing real quickly also, go with some non-traditional guerrilla marketing too. I remember there's this guy, he was at Comic-Con years ago, right after the first of the Star Wars sequels came out, The Force Awakens. He was handing out a flyer with a big picture of Mark Hamill on it, and it says, wanted or missing or something like that, right? Because he doesn't appear in the movie until the very end.
Yeah.
And then you look at the very bottom, and there's this little thing that says, did you find this interesting? Check out the blah, blah, blah Star Wars podcast that this guy was doing. And I'm like, that was brilliant. This guy got people talking by handing out a flyer, right? He probably printed 100 or so of them for, a few bucks, and just started handing them out at Comic-Con, and people were seeing them, and I'm sure he had great traction. So it's okay to go, non-traditional guerrilla marketing tactics, put up stickers, give out flyers, get temporary tattoos. Like I said, get a beacon or, like,
We did that once.
Yeah.
temporary tattoos.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
It really blew up. Right before the 2018 NAB show, which is the largest broadcasting conference, Tess and I got temporary tattoos of NDI. But we filmed it. We paid a tattoo parlor to pretend to be doing it. And I was like biting down on a piece of like wood. And I was like, oh, and we come out, and literally it was the first time I had ever gotten like 100 shares. Like people were like, these guys are crazy. They're tattooing NDI on their forearms. Like it was getting shared like right before NAB. So man, that was one where Tess remembers, I was like, dang, that worked.
It's to up the ante, just do it right on the forehead. Check it out in Vegas NAB this year. So, Mike, question number 10 is kind of a trick question because it's not a question at all. You have to remember to have fun, right? You can't do this and not enjoy the process. If you're not enjoying the process, something needs to be changed. Either it's your co-host, you guys not getting along, you're not finding the connection right.
Fine, I'll leave.
Yeah. Get out of here. Or maybe it's that this isn't actually something you want to do. It's way harder than you expected it to be. It requires a lot more time than you thought it might. So I just wanted to say that because it's a long journey, and we went through basically the entire process from beginning to end on how to create a podcast. So you need to kind of step back and see if you're enjoying this. If you're not enjoying this, then what are you doing, right, Paul? Like, you have been doing podcasts and making videos for over a decade now, and I can tell you still enjoy this. I mean, you can do it on the fly like nobody else can. So it's true, right, Paul? If you're not enjoying it, the content's not going to be good and you're going to hate it.
Yeah, I think it is key. You know, you got to pick something you're passionate about. That's the contagious part. That's what people connect with. If you're not passionate about it, it's probably not going to work. Save yourself some time. Now, I do think there's some boring stuff that people make fun, you know, like financial data. You know, you see like Jim Cramer, right? And there's sometimes that's interesting. It's like, all right, this is boring content, but you know people want it.
Well, but he
Like,
loves it.
Yeah, or he loves it,
Right?
or is there
He's
a way
passionate
to
about it.
is there a way to make it, you know, fun?
I think to John, your point, and to kind of, you know, reinforce that, if you're not enjoying making it, why would I enjoy listening to it?
Yeah.
And so when we were coaching clients or even coaching guests to be on podcasts, we always said, you know, the last thing as far as how to be a great host or how to be a great guest is to smile. And even if you're just doing an audio medium, I can hear somebody who is smiling while they're talking versus someone who's just here telling you about podcasting. Oh man, this is no, I'm excited. Like, this is something that I've known for 15 years. So yeah, you asked me a question about podcasting. I'm excited to share that information with you. And hopefully that is being felt by the listeners. If I came over here almost angry, like, what do you want to know about podcasting? Nobody's going to want to listen. Or if I sound annoyed that that I have to do this again, the audience is going to react to it. So yeah, if it's not fun for you, if you're not driven by the passion for it, if you're, you know, like I said in the beginning, if you're willing to talk about something without more than one listener, then you'll probably be more successful than if you're only doing this to get listeners and followers. It's just the stress, the angst, the work. It's not easy. And so if you're not enjoying it, you're not going to stay with it, and you'll never be successful with it.
So you might have not noticed, but the podcast is currently being filmed on PTZ cameras from PTZOptics. So yeah, as you can see as well, we have a Studio 4K, which is our latest and greatest 4K camera. As you can see there, he's holding it up.
But they're right there.
Yeah, balance it perfectly
Force
for
the
us.
camera on me.
So yeah, thanks, Mike, for showing that off. So what you're seeing right now is a Flex bundle. If there's a reseller of choice that you like to buy PTZOptics from, you can buy a bundle. You can even buy a Flex bundle where you can kind of mix and match some of the hardware there. So you see a 30x 4K, Move 4K on the right there. I think that's a 12x on the left. And then there's the Studio 4K that we were just mentioning, all controlled by the SuperJoy. So Paul, I wanted to ask you, and Mike, if you could show my screen again, why we should use PTZ cameras for podcasting. Where do you find the value? I mean, obviously there's great features like auto tracking. We have presenter lock on our cameras that work great for, you know, your solo tracking speaker, or you could even use group tracking where you could kind of frame multiple people in one location.
Yeah, you know, now that you brought this slide up, I almost wish we would have done this the whole show, but auto tracking is a technology that a PTZ camera can follow a person, right? And something that we don't do often enough, and I would like to try to remember to do this more often, is you can have an auto tracking camera zoomed into a person that's sitting. And it just gives that, like, if you ever watched the John Oliver show, like if he goes left and right, the camera goes left and right, just a little bit. It's what a professional television show can do. You can get a $1,000 camera from PTZOptics that will do that. So, you know, it's interesting what you can do on a budget that's 1/100th what their HBO is doing. And even in the studio that we're in here, we've got 6 or 8 cameras, you know, and we're putting together a podcast. The nice thing about the remote, there's 2 nice things, right? One is the auto tracking where it makes it look like there's a camera. Like you could have one guy who's producing the show right now. There's 4 of us in here, 1 producer. He could have 3 PTZ cameras in tracking mode, making it look like there's 4 camera operators. The other interesting thing is if you need help, you can now have someone who's remote to you color correct the cameras, dial them in. I mean, you've already got enough work just setting up your podcast, being creative, figuring out what's going on, distributing it. Now with robotic cameras, you can have someone working from home dial in, zoom them in, and do all of that. And on the audio side as well now, you can now have remote mixing. So you can literally set it up so that if it's your home office, you can have a couple professionals literally from home dial in, get the cameras working, get them framed up, listen to the audio all over the public internet.
You know, I'm a little bit newer to the concept of PTZ cameras, especially when it comes to podcasting. Some of the earlier video podcasts that I worked on, it was always about getting a mirrorless camera, getting a DSLR, right? Spending anywhere between $1,500 to $4,000 on a single camera. And those cameras, while they're great, right? They can obviously take a very nice picture and show nice video. One, they could be super complicated, right? Like I remember setting up a Sony camera for a studio and like having to go through about 30 steps to get the camera to the place where it's going to work the way I want it to work. It doesn't just work out of the box. And two, it doesn't have any flexibility, right? So I'm either putting it on a stand in the middle of the room, right? Adding to the tripping hazards, and the cables, and all these other things that are going to make the studio like cluttered and a little bit more annoying. Or I can get my hands on 4K cameras, PTZ cameras. I can mount them on the wall totally out of the way. And then, like you said, I can just remote, move them and shape them and focus on what's important to me. Or if I decide to change the room a little bit, right? I change my setup. I don't have to move all the cameras, move all the wires. I just, turn the camera a little bit and I'm set to go. I mean, I think Joe and I both agree that any more, unless somebody specifically doesn't, any more video setups that we're going to be doing, we're going to have PTZ cameras, just because they are so convenient. They are so high quality. And now they're coming with so many incredible features that the other cameras, they just can't touch them right now.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah. So currently for PTZOptics, if you're interested in buying a bundle, Mike, if you could show my screen here, there's two options. So we mentioned a flex bundle, which allows you to kind of pick and choose the hardware you want. But we also have bundles that are kind of preset. We have the Move SE producer bundle and the Move 4K producer bundle as well. So these are just two kind of, I would say, in the middle or medium in terms of workflows. They're not simple and they're not overly complicated, but you can kind of see the potential. And now we're only showing off one Shure microphone, but you could imagine, connecting to that Rodecaster 3 or 4 different microphones, depending on how many speakers you have for your podcast. And I wanted to ask you guys that question, 1080p or 4K? A lot of people will say, I'm streaming at 1080. I don't need to worry about 4K. It's not necessary. But my answer to that is always the recording. The recording is just as important sometimes than actual live streaming, right? So being able to crop in, and you could still export at 1080, but you're going to get a lot more, crispy image, and you're going to get a lot better color from that 4K sensor as well. So 1080 or 4K? What do you guys think?
I think it's a lot about infrastructure, and that's not just, the camera, but 4K files are huge, right? Do you have the storage for them? Do you have the internet bandwidth to upload and download those files or send them to the people that you need? And like you said, a lot of the platforms, when you upload, they're recoding them anyway to a lower format. Listen, I'm with you. If I can get 4K, I want 4K, right? I want as many pixels as possible, as many options as possible. Right, with some of the new tools out there, you can create multiple scenes out of one camera angle and make it look like a 3 or 4 camera shoot with just the one. And the 4K obviously does that a lot better. But listen, if all you can manage is 1080, it's not the end of the world, right? And if your show does well, you get more listeners, you get more money, great, upgrade to 4K. But it's just it's not even individual, just like the infrastructure of our world is just not conducive for convenient 4K without having to have lots of extra resources.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and it's really that simple, it's really about what you can do, right? What's feasible.
Sustainable.
right? And what's efficient for you. I mean, generally speaking, like I like when it comes to video, I tend to, like to use 1080 generally speaking, but I like to make sure that I have really good lighting, and I like to make sure that it's a really strong 1080 because I think that in many cases the I mean the human eye can tell the difference, I think, right, when you see them side by side, but it's not quite as stark of a difference, I think, as if you have like, right, I mean something like a 480 video signal, to I mean to even a 720 or something like that.
Yeah.
It's clearly better, right? It's clearly sharper, right? It has richer colors, I mean, like John, like you said it, like there's so many things to like about 4K, and I mean, I love to look at 4K. It's beautiful. The only thing that I really don't like about 4K, to Matthew's point, is just that it's kind of a pain to work with, and it's probably going to slow you down a little bit when it comes to the production and stuff like that, and it's just a bandwidth and a resources issue. But that's really the only thing I don't like about 4K. And so to that point, like if you can swing it, then you should definitely do it. But I'll tell you what, like we got our hands on some PTZ Optics Move SE, the 1080 versions, and man, like Matthew was saying, man, these things are just a game changer for us. Like, I mean, in our studio designs, it's just like there's really nothing to not like about it. I mean, it frees up floor space, right? You got power over Ethernet. You have just about every plug on the back of that camera that you could ever want. They're just like they're fun to work with, right? They come with a remote control. You can plug them into a Super Joy, like for the joystick control. And it's just like there's so many features, right, that I won't, I mean, I could talk about them all day, but the point I want to get back to is that like the 1080 on those cameras looks amazing. Like it really does. And I love how it's all optical zoom. It's, it's not like that crappy, compressed digital zoom, that looks like crap. So, I mean, I'd like to kind of, put a bow on this, I guess, like 1080 is just fine in my opinion. Like 4K is great if you can do it, but I wouldn't let that stop you from stepping into video. And the PTZ Optics Move SE 1080 is a great camera to consider for just about any content creator because of just, all the reasons, that it's great. I mean, it's great for live streaming, it's great for video recording and for production and just about everything else. And like Matthew was saying, it's just so much easier to work with than something like a mirrorless camera or like a DSLR camera, with all the settings and all the things. These things, man, you plug it right into your computer with a USB and it just works. And it's actually more affordable than, most cameras out there that like you would probably be, looking at as being competitive, to what they could do from a visual standpoint. It's very reasonably priced. It's a great product.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think some people, thanks, Mike, for showing this, because some people might want to mix and match.
Mhm.
There's the opportunity of combining a 4K signal with a 1080 signal, and you can do that really easily. And you could kind of reduce it all at 1080, but you're still getting better low light. You're getting better quality and better color with 4K, even if you are just streaming or recording in 1080p. So if you're interested in the Flex bundles from PTZ Optics, you can reach out to your favorite reseller. And, if you're talking about Sweetwater, B&H, Broadfield, there's so many great options to buy PTZ Optics. And you can mix and match as much as you want to, whether it's a 12X, 20X. If you want a fixed frame camera, like a Studio 4K, you can do that as well. What I want to throw out is directly to you guys, Custom Podcast Solutions. I want to wrap this up by asking you what you guys offer, what you guys do, where do you offer your services, and tell me all about Custom Podcast Solutions before we wrap up here.
Well, you can learn more at custompodcastsolutions.com. And like our main sort of service that we provide is like the studio design, studio building, studio installation. We love to kind of work with content creators, that are either just getting started, right, or they're looking to kind of level up their setup or their space, and create a perfect space, a studio, a set for them to be able to create in a way that's very plug and play. Right, it's very user friendly, seamless experience. So the studio design is one aspect. Like the other thing that we talked about a little bit earlier are the podcast beacons, which I have one right here. You can kind of see what it looks like. It's like a little key fob. And we have like some other products, within like the Beacon brand, but like the idea is that it's a smartphone tap technology. So like it uses NFC chips within a series of like these devices, right? We have bracelets, we have fobs, we have table stands, we have like some other products, but the beauty is that it just makes sharing your content or your profile or just about any digital destination just as simple as a tap of a smartphone. You can learn more about those at podcastbeacon.com or custompodcaststore.com. Matthew, did I miss anything?
Because we're sitting here doing a live stream, we also are, really pushing also mobile podcast solutions. So, maybe you don't have a set studio, or maybe you have one, but you're going to an event or a conference, or you want to do something on location. We have the right equipment to bring out to you, so we can handle your live stream, handle everything that you have there, make it look and sound really, really great. And just in general, if you want to make sure that your current setup is made for live streaming, we're introducing those services. Got a few other fun product ideas that are in the works that some things we want to talk about out loud, some things we don't. But truthfully, if we're just curious minds, and so if you have questions or thoughts, or if there's something about the podcasting space that you think could be improved upon, please let us know. And if we can, we'll fix it, or maybe the solution already exists and we could tell you about it. So, the name really says it all. We're just here to try and give you the solution that works best for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt and Joe. I appreciate that. And Tess, I want to reach out to you as well. We lost Paul. He had to go take a call, which was urgent. So Tess, tell me, are there any questions, anything else from our audience here that we kind of didn't hit on during the show?
The one thing that we didn't cover was somebody was looking for a recommendation for a microphone to start off.
Okay. Yeah, we had Lucy early on mentioning about microphones. You mentioned too. Yeah, so we did hit upon it a little bit, but you could also look into Shure as a great brand. They now make cheaper podcasting mics. They're not expensive as the $400 microphones that are in front of us now. There's also great, Elgato is a great ecosystem. If you're already kind of using a Stream Deck and you want to integrate a mic into that, that's really useful. But also Yeti. I mean, Yeti's been around forever. That's not the best quality, but it's definitely affordable. I can see your opinions already. Tell me about Yeti.
I won't say this about Yeti specifically. What I will say is that when you are looking for a microphone and you're just getting started and you don't have a soundproof room, or you don't have really good sound treatment, or you're in your office, or you're sharing it with, doing it in your house with your kids and the dog and everything else, make sure any mic you pick up, try and pick up a dynamic microphone versus a condenser microphone. And the way I'm about to describe this, I'm sure audiophiles and engineers are going to scream at me and post comments about how outrageous I am for saying this, but this is me dumbing it down for myself and for others. But when you have a condenser microphone is pretty much like out there looking for sound, right? It's trying to find the sound wherever you can get it. Whereas a dynamic microphone, you really have to push the sound into it.
Yeah.
And so, if you're not doing this in a well-treated area, a condenser microphone is going to pick up a ton of extra noise. I had a Rode NT1A as one of my first microphones, beautiful microphone. And I was on the third floor of an apartment building. And while I was recording, you can hear like the squirrels fighting on the ground. And it was just way too sensitive.
Yeah.
So, Yeti makes a very nice looking microphone. And if you know how to use it, it can be a great microphone. But lots of first time podcasters get it because it's often recommended, and it was in Apple stores for a long time. And they wind up not sounding as good as they think they're going to, because it can just be too sensitive and can create a lot of problems. So again, anything that says it's a dynamic microphone will probably be a better solution in the beginning for you than anything else. And if you missed it again, it's the ATR 2100, the Samsung Q2U. Those are cheaper handheld dynamic microphones that do XLR and USB. So if you're doing it alone, great, plug it into your computer. If you are expanding in the future and going to get an interface or a mixer, right, it has the XLR, so you don't have to go and buy all new microphones, right? You can incorporate those. The Shure MV7, right? That's like the cheaper cousin to this one, right? Also USB and XLR, although I think they're putting out versions of each, just one or the other. But yeah, I would seriously stress dynamic microphones to start, just to avoid background noise and other complications in your sound.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you, Matt and Joe from Custom Podcast Solutions at custompodcastsolutions.com, right?
That's it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, guys. I appreciate you guys having to come all the way here during a snowstorm, bearing the weather and coming to greet us. And it's been a great time. And I want to thank everybody out there who's watching. If you are looking for more Stream Geeks, you can go to streamgeeks.us. We're here on the second Wednesday of every month at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We also have great other resources like remoteproduction.com or remotephotography.com. And of course, PTZOptics.com if you're looking for some great PTZ hardware. Thank you, gentlemen, and we'll talk to you guys soon. We'll see you very, very soon.
Thanks, John.